I'll reconvene the meeting, and we're still in the meeting of the committee as a whole for finance. And Curator Steelman, I believe you have the next item of business.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like Interim Vice President Rapp to again come up, and he's going to talk about the architect approval for the south expansion of Memorial Stadium at the University of Missouri campus. I think all of you will remember that this is regarding quite an extensive potential project.
Thank you, Curator Steelman. As you noted, the next item is a request to allow MU Athletics to move forward with the selection of an architect for the South End Zone project that was presented to the board in October. The request specifically seeks board approval to engage Populous as the architect and authorizes MU to spend $4.31 million on design costs for the project. The $4.31 million comes entirely from donor funds. The project is important to MU Athletics and the department remaining competitive in the SEC, and is an important part of the recruiting process. Additionally, MU Athletics is a self-sustaining operation and supports the campus. The success of MU Athletics has a direct impact on MU's ability not only to recruit student athletes, but helps the campus grow and maintain enrollments. The proposed approach allows the project to move forward in a fiscally responsible manner by allowing $4.31 million in donor funds to hire an architect and gives the university flexibility in challenging fiscal times. Additionally, it allows for further fundraising, reducing the potential bonding needs of the project, and will allow for further refinement of the total cost of the project, including potential savings prior to the project being brought to the board for a formal approval in June. I'd welcome any questions the board might have on the project.
Would you explain also briefly that this was the efforts of the athletic department to both meet the needs of the athletic department, the football program, but also to help us deal with the financial issues?
Yeah, I think through this approach, we're taking a measured approach that allows athletics to continue to do what they need to do, but also allows us to better understand what our fiscal picture is going to look like going forward. So I think, as I noted, I think this is a very measured approach.
Any questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, I understand, Ryan, that in talking with some of the athletic department that they have actually they have commitments in hand of about $45 million at this point. And of course, depending on what we do, they want to move that forward. And if in fact we approve this, they're not slowing down. They're going to continue to raise private dollars, private gifts to add to that number as we go forward. And I think that's an important aspect to recognize what Jim Sturck and Brian White and his staff have been able to do in a very short period of time with regard to this. Some of you don't know, but football is really about 90% of the total budget in athletics for the university. Out of about $100 million, they're responsible for about 90 million of it. And so it literally pays for all the other athletics that go on at the university, and we compete at a very high level. So I think it's something that's needed to keep pace, and unless there are other questions, I'll be happy to make a motion.
Any other questions or comments?
Chairs would welcome a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that I'd recommend that the amount of money for finance to employ Populous, Inc. of Kansas City for the design of the Memorial South expansion be approved.
Second.
Any discussion?
And Ryan, I understand these are all donated funds.
Correct. They are all donated funds.
Any other questions or discussion?
I think it might be helpful just to say that a lot of us raise our eyebrows at the amount that we devote to athletics, myself included. But I'm convinced that this particular project, although expensive, will benefit the entire university, particularly the MU campus, but the entire university. And there's such private support for it, it's hard to say no. So I'm a reluctant yes, and I do appreciate in this time where we have restricted funds, but when you have a project that is as well-funded as this one privately, I think you have to be supportive.
Any other discussion or questions? Hearing none, we'll proceed to a vote. Cindy?
Curator Cupps?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
No.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes?
Curator Steelman?
Yes.
Okay. You have 5 votes in favor, 1 opposed.
Motion carried.
Mr. Chairman, that is all the finance issues.
We'll proceed then to the next item on the agenda, rather early, and that would be Curator Phillips, Compensation and Human Resources. We're meeting as a committee as a whole, but you'll lead the discussion.
Let me introduce the topic and also, again, Interim Vice President and Chief Human Resource Officer Jill Pollack, who about a year ago joined us on short notice and has been a real blessing, particularly with her knowledge of benefits and retirement. We've embarked upon a program in the last couple of years to try to contain the cost of retirement with a hybrid program, and we've made continued progress with respect to benefits, having recently dealt with retirement insurance, population health, and neural network. And so what we're going to have today, I think we've committed to ourselves to have a review of this once a year. And so this is review time, even though we're a little understaffed in terms of curators. We may have to redo this at some point. But please, I'm going to turn this over to Jill, and she'll walk us through some of the progress that is being made.
Thank you, Curator Phillips. So I'm told that every February we come and tell you about benefits and where we are, how we're doing. So something I'm acutely aware of, though, is that benefits and a discussion of it often causes eyes to glaze over right after lunch. So there's some other elements that I've added to this that I particularly wanted to talk with you about today. But let's get through initially those key things that we're obliged to talk about under the CRR. And it requires that we give you this annual update on benefit and retirement plans and talk about any actions we took during the preceding year, any studies we have made, trends and developments in this field, and to the extent we have it, various peer analyses. So we're going to do that. We're also going to talk a little bit about the Total Rewards Advisory Council, our TRAC, and it is a very interesting council, and I'll talk a little bit about how it has really worked for us as we go along. A little bit about medical plan opportunities and challenges, a link to financial wellness. And I don't have to talk too much about that because we know that there is a very strong link between how we are health-wise, physically, and how we are financially healthy. And then what projected retirements and changing workforce demographics are going to do for us in the coming few years. So let's flip to that next slide. Thought I would, because many of you have been on the board for a while, I would just kind of whip through this timeline. But for those of you who have not seen it, it'll give you a sense of where this all began. And in 2013, at the direction of the president and the board, there was a Total Rewards ad hoc task force that had about 14 people. And it had 2 goals. One, that we should end up with a benefit structure that serves to enhance our recruitment and retention of talented faculty and staff. The other side of that equation is to manage our costs. So right after those recommendations, we began working on a number of initiatives. And while I'm not going to go through the directional recommendations, they've been covered with you before, but I have them if you want to come back to them. Is that we did some things in 2014 that you should have done a while ago, but it was a good thing to do. And that is active enrollment. Every year, we ought to be asking people to really seriously look at their benefit structure and make a decision about what their choices are. Now, that helps us cost-wise, but it also helps them make the right decision for their families instead of just letting it roll. We also had obtained a commitment to hold the benefit rate flat at 27.67%. And it was, I'll look at Ryan here, I think it was a 3-year commitment. It's actually continuing into this fiscal year. We formed an HR communications function to address some recommendations. And then in 2015, we formed the Total Rewards Advisory Council. It has 15 people on it. There are faculty and staff from all the campuses, and there are 2 retiree representatives. And they've been really good as both sounding boards, thought leaders from their campuses, and generally all around good people as we've worked through some difficult decisions. When we look at the benefit structure at the University of Missouri system, we had really 2 choices up until 2015. We had what's called a preferred provider organization, which is something, it's fairly traditional way that we go find docs, we select them, they're in the network, we pay them, we pay some piece of it ourselves, and we're all reasonably happy. We also had a high deductible plan, which is allowed under the federal law. And it's ours is called a healthy savings account. This is the one that has a deductible at the beginning. And the intent of this high deductible plan is for us to be really informed consumers. It's been slow taking off because informed consumers also means you have to pay front end. And we have a deductible of about $1,500 for the individual, $3,000 for family. But it also allows the individual to save tax deferred to pay for some of that. And so those are the 2 that we had. We saw an in-between place that in conjunction with the University of Missouri Health to narrow the network, because a lot of our employees, particularly in this market, this town, see physicians that are affiliated with the University of Missouri. It was an opportunity to narrow the network, do a deal on rates, and encourage people to pay more attention to their health. So we began to do that for Columbia. We have 43%, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but we have a lot of people in this market that chose that. And each year, these last two years now, they've added to those numbers. We have to work a bit more on it to improve all the efficiencies to result in the cost savings we're hoping for. But it's absolutely the way that we see the trend nationally to narrow networks. We did a tobacco-free discount of $50 a month for those who attest that they are non-smokers. And the track was involved in all of those discussions and consensus building. In 2016, we expanded that custom network to St. Louis with Mercy Health. So we just signed up there. We have about 18% of the workforce in that health plan. We don't know how it's going to perform yet, but the goal is to have it as a plan and its plan administrators pay attention to our health state and help our employees improve their physical and behavioral health. So in 2017, TRAC is going to be looking at 5 areas. One is tuition assistance. When President-designate Choi did those first visits to all the campuses and talked, and this was primarily with staff, the number one concern expressed was that the tuition assistance program is not competitive. The number two was around employee development. And I'm not going to talk about that today because it is a task that we have to be more intentional about. But tuition assistance, we are not competitive nationally. We require a very long vesting period for dependents to even participate, of 5 years. Most schools, it's 1 or immediate. We do have our financial piece of it is good. It's 50% for our dependents, and then our employees can have in perpetuity the opportunity to take classes, 6 credits, fall and spring, 3 in the summer. So we have that ahead of us. Marketing of ancillary plans in this instance actually means going out to bid. So we're going to go out to bid for dental, vision, and life insurance, and both our administrators in our group and our track will have input to that. The well-being strategy, otherwise known as wellness, needs to be fine-tuned. And that's something that we'll undertake this year. It's a very real function that we ought to be performing in conjunction with our health plans, but we have an opportunity to make it even better than it is. And then there are some population health initiatives, primarily to control costs, but costs as we write them large, and that is the actual health costs, the cost of attendance, the cost of having chronic conditions in your family that make you take time away from work, and it affects all of us. The last is to take a look at the possibility of using more of a 311 type service, which is taking our service centers and being more intentional about merging them so we can be most responsive to health and other related questions. This chart you've seen before. This is actually from finance, and we borrowed it. We've attributed it. But of the $330 million that we spend we're spending in fiscal 17 on benefits, you can see that 86% are on retirement and medical insurance. So the fiduciary responsibility to manage these well is pretty significant, because that's where, between payroll and this is where the majority of our operating costs are. So what I wanted to do here was, and we'll think about this one as a stoplight. And there's a difference between circles and triangles here. Circles mean how we manage our plan. Triangles mean population health. And I'm going to talk about them separately. So what are the things that we're doing well that help to keep costs down? Well, as we looked at our plans, and we were benchmarked against 32 universities with about 143,000 members, we are 23% more efficient. And I was chuckling to myself when Ryan talked this morning about some efficiencies. In fact, we manage these plans efficiently. The cost avoidance is about $42 million a year. We have a quarter of our people enrolled in that high deductible plan, and that's a good thing because that means people are paying attention to how much healthcare costs and when they make decisions about using it or not using it. Things that fall into that middle range is that our year-over-year increase in claims costs is, in my opinion, too high. It is not too high relative to United Healthcare, who is our administrator. Their norm for their book of business is about 9%, so we're close to that. I will tell you that the national norm, though, that Mercer just released last week is 6%. In my old school, we had year-over-year last of 2.88. So we have some improvements to make here. If we can improve in this area, obviously that affects the $330 million. We have 43% enrollment in the custom network plan. That's good. What we haven't done yet is started really to work on population health and how we actually begin to deliver enhanced ways for people to manage their own health state. So we have some work we can do there. Most of our employees are in the plan. And when they are, half of them, roughly, almost, have dependent coverage. And dependents cost more. That's just a fact of life. It's yellow because it just is. That's That's how plans run. The last yellow at the top in the triangle speaks to population health. We are actually, if you think as one is being sort of a neutral health, we're healthy, okay. Anything below that would be we're really healthy relative to peers. We're still a little unhealthy, but again, as we look at our peer institutions, we're probably okay. Where we have the opportunity to do some real exciting work, though, is over in this red area when they're all triangles. These are chronic conditions. Chronic conditions for our population account for 52% of all our costs. All right, chronic conditions never become unchronic. But where do we have an opportunity to make change is before we get there. So I'm going to give you an example of that. We can address chronic conditions when they are pre-something. Then we have a chance of people never getting into chronic conditions. And we haven't really tackled that. That's what, generally speaking, that's what we call population health. So just, I'll give you a little, you see the percentages on there. I'll just give you a couple of odds and ends. Sort of, these were interesting to me. They may not be interesting to you. Knees and backs, other musculoskeletal costs for the 12%, 76% of our osteoarthritis procedure is spent on knee and hip replacements. Now, part of that's because we have baby boomers moving through our population and we're all getting our stuff fixed before we retire. But those are elective surgeries, and they are things for us to watch. Circulatory, including diabetes, accounts for 8% of our costs. However, diabetes accounts for 13% of our catastrophic claim costs. You know, if you've read anything about diabetes, we know that this is a national epidemic, both diabetes, primarily diabetes type 2, which can be managed, and type 1, which generally is hereditary. In Missouri, this is a growing epidemic. Approximately 13.2% of the population in Missouri has diabetes. In addition, 35.9% have pre-diabetes. And how do we know that? Because some of the diagnostic codes that go along with that are hypertension, obesity, joint issues, all the things we think about. Think about someone you know with type 2 diabetes. While our prevalence rate here is lower than the state, our spend for diabetes exceeds both our norm and our national average. Our diabetic population's spend is 144% higher than people who do not have diabetes. Statewide diabetes costs are estimated at $5.9 billion in Missouri each year. It's estimated that another $1.4 billion is spent on indirect costs, so eye issues, feet issues, other things that may lend itself to lost productivity. So pre-diabetes and diabetes 2 better management is a huge opportunity nationwide and for us at the University of Missouri system. I'm not going to go through all of these, but we're tackling this one in an intentional way that starts with low risk, just prevention, and then moves into the those that have been diagnosed, how to manage that, people who are having a hard time managing it, help for them. And I wanted to highlight a couple of areas at our campuses that we're doing some cool things. So the one that struck me in particular was at S&T, and it's a Weight Watchers at Work, but it's called Recipe Makeover Challenge. and it's in conjunction with the Staff Council, MU Extension, and Dining Services. This Healthy for Life will make over employee-submitted recipes into budget-friendly, health-conscious versions. These are little things, but it involves people in their own communities. We're doing a lot around discounts and resources, and there's some physical activity things that we've included as well. This is one of those we're going to need to get a better handle on. And sometimes you do that as well through plan design. There is one aspect, and it's the Livongo one, I think, and I may be wrong, and some of my folks can correct me, but in some of these, we can actually get diabetes supplies without cost if you are adherent. There are other plans nationally that actually provide zero copay for the prescription-related materials, insulin and other preventive or treatment modalities. And it's worth looking at how those are progressing. We flipped from physical wellness or that performance to financial wellness. As I said at the beginning, there is a link. And back in 2014, the American Psychological Association conducted a poll of citizens and found money to be the top source of stress among adults in the United States, affecting 71% of respondents. Well, no surprise there. Routine stress as well can contribute to chronic health conditions such as heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, depression, anxiety, disengagement from the workplace, lost productivity. So we decided last fall, and this was before I got here, so kudos to the folks, that we would take an enterprise-wide approach to financial wellness. And we've had some good success. Little numbers, but good success. And we're increasing our rollout this year. So we've added more one-on-one opportunities with Fidelity and TIAA. That seems to help. Remember, we also have, and I'll show you a slide in a sec, we're moving through the baby boom bubble in a pretty big way right now. So this is pretty important. And so we've had an increase in people signing up for that. We've had a 44% increase in educational workshops. And for those people who go through the workshops, we are seeing an average 10% incremental voluntary employee deferral. That is a tax-deferred savings for your future, for your retirement. I wanted to as well tell you about one program just briefly, and that is, it's called Working Toward Economically Abundant Living Through Habit, otherwise known as wealth. But it's done by students on this campus, and they are volunteers from the Office of Financial Success. I think it's financial aid, but it's success. They are working with faculty and staff to cover different aspects of personal finance. And these are young people who are working toward their certifications in financial planning. They have been enormously popular. There's a waiting list for participation in them. If we have people involved in this, then what does that mean as we move through our the shift in our pension plans? So back about a year after we made that shift where we had data from that old plan to now one that is a hybrid defined benefit, defined contribution plan. You know, in 2013, almost everybody was still in the defined benefit or pension plan. But just in 3 years, we're at 2/3, 1/3. 1/3 are now in that hybrid plan where they have to make decisions to some degree about where their money goes, how it is invested. It is so important that we provide educational opportunities for our folks. There's a fair amount of behavioral economics research around when you offer education, and it's around a decision-making timeframe. So folks that are getting closer to retirement, we want to have more conversations about this. I think another factor that you're aware of, because it came to the board earlier last year, was that we made a change to retiree medical insurance. And you have in your book what those changes went from and to, but essentially they changed from how we calculate eligibility and how much of a subsidy you get. And the last bullet on the right-hand side of the new subsidy is the one that's getting a lot of attention, and that is age and years of service less than 80 points. So we go to a fixed flat rate annual subsidy of $100 per year of service, up to $2,500 annually, to purchase retiree insurance coverage. This helps us on our accounting side. Ryan and I were talking just after lunch. We all started this conversation back when we didn't have to with GASB 45. There's the new rule that's not quite yet out, but we're all working against, is GASB 70, and speaks to how we have to account for these future expenses in our current year. So this has had a consequence beyond what we expected. Certainly for those people who may be retired or getting close to retirement, they're paying a lot of attention to it. But it's also moved a lot of people towards serious consideration of retiring in calendar 2017, because the effective date is January 1, 2018. So we are increasing the amount of, let's go up one, briefings, interactions on both the health plan. We had, I think, fully subscribed meetings on that. But then again, coming back to what would it take to retire? What does that look like? And then what you see here in 17 and 18 is that spike in the green. And that's where we're projecting an increased number of retirements, and there's a relationship there. After 2020, our baby boom bubble starts coming down, probably be done by 2030. But we're watching closely this year and next, because this may play into a campus strategy on our financial picture. Finally, what's next? Even though we have boomers going out to 2030, a lot of them are choosing to retire. Generation X, the one that was right behind them, is not a big population, X and Y. We're not going to have as many 25 to 34-year-olds, which historically have been our feeder group to leadership positions. And that new workforce, then, that we have in the next, say, 3 years, is we're going to have folks over 25 years of service and less than 7. So that means we have to think about how we develop them and how we move them through opportunities. It may alter how we structure our organization, because we simply are going to have different requirements. And when we talk about millennials as though they're not there, but they are already our dominant population in the workforce. And as relates to benefits, they want more choice and variety through more voluntary, less traditional benefits. Not on here is they want more employee development opportunities, not necessarily promotion as that next step, but learning for learning's sake. So I think the challenge for us in HR, and as we talk to many of you, will be how do we design our benefits package for our present employees, maybe newer here, and our employees of the future. So thank you. That concludes my presentation. Curator Phillips.
I don't think we have any action items. Does anybody have Any questions?
I have one, if I could.
Ready.
You indicated that we were not competitive with tuition assistance, and I accept that on what you said, and the why question is always confusing, but when we're not competitive nationally, I would like to understand, if possible, the reasoning behind that. Is it a case where maybe groupthink of higher education is wrong and we're doing the right and prudent thing? Or is it because we have a lack of vision? Or is there somewhere in between? Why are we late to that dance on tuition
I think the
assistance?
real answer for me is that I don't know. But someone made a decision some time ago, and I can give a sense of it, that 5 years was that right number for dependents. Because typically what we see, if people come in and they're new employees, if they stay 5 years, they stay a long time. If they're going to go, they're usually going to go 5 years or less. So there's some prudent financial decision thought that has gone in the past. What has happened, however, is that faculty and staff, in fact, move more fluidly among employers than they did in the past. They used to come to universities just like big corporations and stay. We don't see that as much. But so then you start saying, well, what else is going on? What is anybody else doing with our primary product? So I'm a Ford retiree, I get a Ford discount. I'm going to buy a Ford product. If I'm at a university, tuition becomes sort of that hook for some people, particularly those with school-age children who are going to move into college soon. But for whatever reason, as we look at our peer institutions, from those institutions from which we would pull people in all likelihood, where we would attract, typically it's the vesting that's off. It's not the money, it's not the discount.
Well, and that's what I'm getting at. Do we even know whether this is a difficult thing financially? If it puts more enrollment, particularly on some of our campuses, which are short enrollment, 50% of tuition might be 50% of something that we weren't getting before. And so
Sure.
we need it
Absolutely.
to look forward, and we need to try to figure out why these decisions were made and if they still apply, given, one, our current enrollment situation, and two, the realities of the world we live in. So I would encourage that we have some sort of timeline on something like that, which seems to me like it can easily have the market research done and some sort of action taken.
And thank you. This will be for this coming fiscal year. We did do a study last year of peer institutions. One of the things we haven't done yet is to model what the possible effect of various changes would be. So if we went to 3 years or 1 year or immediate or stayed at 5.
Or whether we might even make money on it.
Sure.
Don, did you have a question? Did I see your hand up? No. Anyone else? I have a quick one, I think. You said that we needed to improve on our wellness programs, and I saw on one of the slides, MU Healthy for Life Wellness. Well, my question is, that sounds like it's related to MU Health here in Columbia. Is that affiliated with MU Health, or is it a system-wide program?
Let me have Kelly Holland answer that. He's our Director of Benefits.
Yeah, so the T.E. Atkins Healthy for Life program is the formal name of our system-wide wellness program.
Thanks. Anyone else? That concludes this portion of the human resource presentation and the committee report.
Okay.
Thank you.
No other questions? Thank you, Curator Phillips. And Jill, thank you. Next on the agenda is a combined committee report, and that would be the two committees of Academic, Student, and External Affairs, and Compensation and Human Resources. And I think Curator Snowden and Curator Phillips, you're going to jointly present that.
Go ahead.
Well, we've had a team that has been working for several months, maybe even the better part of a year, reviewing our combined rules and regulations, and they have, I think, gone through a tremendous process that has involved, let's say, all of the larger interested parties, stakeholders, in looking at revisions that are focused on Title IX, but also on other aspects of discrimination. And as a result, the board has received in advance red line copies of the CRRs that focus on this area. I think what we'd like to do is to have them describe shortly the process, which really is, I think, encompassing true shared governance by involvement of the stakeholders, and then describe any particular changes. And just by way of background, most of the people in the room probably know that in 2014, the university was the national focus of an unfortunate incident that had occurred a few years prior. And this board and the then administration took prompt action to revise and try to bring these CRRs and our processes forward by state of the art. And of course, things change. So in the last 2 or 3 years, both by federal mandate and otherwise, things have changed. And so we believe that we're now again reaching out to be the example for the nation and state of the art. I'm not sure who's actually going to start the presentation. Marcia Fisher, are you?
Kevin.
I might add one thing, that this whole process emanated out of the audit that was done on diversity, inclusion and so forth. And out of that, this took place.
So Kevin McDonald, our Chief Diversity Officer for the system. Please proceed.
Thank you, Curator Phillips and Curator Snowden, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. It's my pleasure to just provide some introductory context and then turn this podium over to Ms. Emily Love, who will provide additional context. So you all are well aware that on November 9th of 2015, the board announced additional initiatives to tackle diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts at our system. And part and parcel of those efforts revolved around a diversity audit that Curator Snowden mentioned, to look at diversity, equity, and inclusion aspects of our processes, our practices, our policies, system-wide. Those policies also allowed us to take an opportunity to really look at our CRRs, our collected rules and regulations, to identify opportunities for enhancement and revision for those in an effort to continue to move forward with regard to our diversity and inclusion efforts. And I really want to take this time to really publicly acknowledge some tremendous efforts by some of the colleagues that have been involved in that. So Emily Love, who's providing leadership to diversity, equity, inclusion in our Office for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the system, and Marcia Fisher, who operates in the Office of the General Counsel, really took some long days, early mornings, late evenings, to engage the constituency on all of our campuses and at system, to synthesize their input, right, and really utilize our shared governance to the fullest of our capabilities to make sure that our campus communities were supportive and had an opportunity to really engage in this process to review our collected rules and regulations. So I really want to affirm and acknowledge them for their efforts, but it also is a really symbolic piece for us as a system as we really look to kind of organizationally reflect on our diversity and inclusion efforts and take meaningful steps. And I think Curator Snowden mentioned this and Curator Phillips, to really serve as a model for our nation and our world. So I'm excited to be a part of this effort. I'm excited to have the support of our leadership here as a Board of Curators and our leadership within the system and our other respective campuses. And I'm really grateful for the shared governance aspects and the opportunity to engage our community in ways that allow them to fully support the revisions that have come before us today for a vote for approval. So with that as context, I want to turn it over to Emily to be able to expound a bit more on the process for vetting, and also to go into some level of depth with some of the specific revisions. Emily?
Hi, everyone. As Kevin mentioned, my name is Emily Love. I work in the University of Missouri System Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And as he mentioned, I will be sharing a little bit of context about the revisions, the revision process, so actually how we went in and revised these rules, a little bit about our vetting timeline, as well as highlighting some revisions for you to draw your attention to, though, as you may have seen in the board mailing, there are quite a few changes. So just to repeat what's already been said, in November of 2015, the board announced a series of initiatives related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of which being the diversity audit. That system-wide diversity audit was made up of many pieces, but one of those pieces was a review of our collected rules and regulations from the perspective of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Outside counsel took a look at our CRRs and found that they were compliant with relevant federal and state laws, and that, even better, they were reflective of a number of diversity, equity, and inclusion related best practices. So building upon that already solid foundation, they suggested additional revisions based on other universities for promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion among personnel and students. As a complement to the outside counsel's review, we sought input from key internal constituents who work with these policies every day. In particular, we leveraged the expertise of Title IX coordinators and equity officers on each of the campuses. They are not only experts in this area, but they have incredible insights and experiences as people who work with our faculty, staff, and students, going through processes and dealing with the policies with that hands-on, on-the-ground approach. We set up phone calls with them and our outside counsel throughout the months of June through December, so a lot of interactive phone calls took place to try to front load their feedback and their suggestions and their experiences with the rules into these initial drafts that were ultimately shared with every community member of the university. We paid particularly close attention to the equity resolution processes. The equity resolution processes are the processes for which we handle complaints of discrimination, harassment, or sexual misconduct. And as you can remember, and as Curator Phillips mentioned, in September of 2014, we implemented the student as respondent rule, and a few short months later, in February of 2015, we implemented the faculty and staff as accused rules. Even between those two periods of time, we learned a lot, and we've identified opportunities to improve upon these processes. And so additional improvements and modifications for clarity and consistency can be found in the red lines in your mailing packet. So as I mentioned, every university community member received an email from President Middleton on October 11th with a link to a SharePoint site where that individual could read through the red lines and have an opportunity to share their feedback via online form. We're really happy to have this part of the process because getting input from all constituents across the university really just creates a better set of policies. More purposefully and more with more time spent, Marcia Fisher of the Office of the General Counsel and I visited with key system-wide governance groups multiple times throughout the fall. Our goal in those conversations was first and foremost to seek their input, to draw their attention to these rules and ask them to tell us what they think, tell us what could be improved upon, what are we missing. Second, the second goal is to answer any questions that they may have about this process or why the rules were made how they are. And third, we ultimately sought their buy-in and their endorsement of the rules as they are, with additional suggestions welcome. And we're happy to report that each of these groups has endorsed these rule revisions. And so just to go into the groups that we visited with the Intercampus Faculty Council, the Intercampus Student Council, and the Intercampus Staff Advisory Council. So those are your three major constituent representative groups. Then we spoke with leadership groups, so your general officers, provosts, Human Resources Council, vice chancellors for student affairs, since several of these rules impact students, and our registrars who are responsible for implementing those records policies. We took feedback from each of those groups and compiled it into a pretty lengthy vetting report, which include the recommendation as well as the outcome of that recommendation. So many of the recommendations that came forward were implemented. Some of them were implemented with modifications. So perhaps the spirit of the recommendation was accepted, but we just changed the language a little bit. And another outcome is that we referred it back to that governance group for further vetting. So asking the group that made the recommendation go back and explore it a little bit more and ask other groups to endorse it. And that's an important part of the process so that we don't lose some of those good recommendations that came forward but that didn't quite make it through this round of vetting for your approval today. Finally, we met with President Middleton to ask him to make any final policy decisions before submitting these to you. I will briefly speak to some of the revisions in the policies. As I mentioned before, there's a large volume of them, and it would be way too much to speak to in a presentation, but hopefully I can give you a nice overview. So I discussed the equity resolution processes a bit earlier. We have updated them for consistency and clarity. We have expanded definitions of consent and incapacitation, and those definitions are key tools in the tool belts of our implementers of these policies. They really help those on the campuses who have to go and adjudicate cases like these. We have expanded the role of advisor to be less restrictive during the meetings leading up to the hearing. We have included faculty members in the hearing panelist pool in the student process. We've made it so that we have the ability to process complaints of discrimination and other grievable issues into one singular process. And we've created a fourth equity resolution process to address complaints against the institution or against entities within the institution. In several rules, we've added a notice or a statement of non-discrimination, and we've also implemented a system-wide preferred name policy to address the use of preferred name versus legal name. And finally, we've updated and enhanced our FMLA and policies related to disability accommodations. So as far as next steps go, we will continue to evaluate how these equity resolution processes are working. We are always learning. As I mentioned earlier, we learned a lot even in between September 2014 and February 2015. So I wouldn't be surprised to be back with revisions in front of you in the next year because things are always changing, as we have seen over the last few years. We will be updating educational materials for those students, faculty, and staff who are going through the process to make these policies and processes more accessible to them. And we will also update our training for key personnel, so our hearing panelists and others who work to adjudicate cases of discrimination, harassment, or sexual misconduct. So I will stop there and see if you have any questions before I close.
I have a brief question, and it's not necessarily directed towards the changes, but it's more an inquiry concerning the Title IX changes that we made in 2014 and the utilization of confidential advisors. Is that working, and are people taking advantage of that? And then of those that are reports made to confidential advisors, then how many of those subsequently go and then there's a report? Do we have any idea about
I can answer your first question. Let me follow up with the second. So we've talked to our Title IX coordinators about how those confidential report mechanisms are working. And what we've heard back is that for students, it's going pretty well. We have enough confidential reporters where students are getting the support that they need without necessarily going through the process. For staff, there's fewer resources, and so we're looking to improve upon those and increase the number. But in general, our Title IX offices have worked really hard and have done a really good job of explaining why they exist in terms of providing resources for remedying the effects of this discrimination, harassment, and sexual misconduct. So students have more of a trust of going to them, understanding that in many circumstances, an investigation would not proceed if the complainant did not want to proceed with it. And instead, the office serves as a resource to the students.
Are there any indicators that there's an improvement of climate?
So we conducted a system-wide climate survey on gender-based violence and sexual harassment in the spring of 2015, and we are set to conduct a second survey as a follow-up to that in early 2018. So as far as a survey goes or data goes, I don't necessarily have an answer, but we're kind of consistently monitoring the climate on the campuses, and I think our Title IX coordinators could follow up with you on more information of that.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask a question that I think I know the answer to, but I think it might be good for the public to know this. Is it correct that the availability of confidential advisors, people that complainants or potential complainants may go to, has been expanded, and that groups that are qualified can apply by campus or by system to be identified as confidential reporters?
Yes. So the rule is written in such that the request would go to the Office of the General Counsel, and they would follow up with their approval of whether that individual could serve as a confidential advisor. Now, that's different than a privileged person in which the confidential advisor would report aggregate data every month, non-personally identifiable data to the campus. But yes, we have expanded the potential for confidential advisors to increase.
So as an example, here on this campus, there is an office where potential complainants may go to help decide whether to pursue a complaint or not.
Yes,
And it's not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a physician.
right.
Okay. That's my only question, was to get that out there for the public.
Yeah. Thank you.
A similar question, and I know the answer to this also, but I do want to establish of record that you feel that in arriving at these recommendations to the collected rules and regulations, you contacted all of the constituencies affected by these rules, and you got a broad-based response and input that allowed you to make these recommendations.
Yes, we tried our best to reach everybody, to reach all the constituents across the system.
Thank you.
I would like to say that I think that all of us on the board are impressed with the work that's been done, as Kevin McDonald said, and that you and Marcia Fisher, all three of you and your staffs are to be congratulated on both the revisions that we've seen and the implementation since this was addressed in 2014, and particularly impressed by the process that you went through that brought consensus by the constituent groups. So I think we really appreciate that work.
Thank you. And thank you to the board for your leadership and to all my colleagues on the campuses who do this work.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to echo John Phillips' comments, and really a yeoman's work on the part of the whole staff, but particularly Kevin McDonald and Marcia Fisher and Emily Love. So thank you all.
Is there a motion?
May I add something? Is that within the protocol?
Yes.
I want to share what Curator Phillips and Curator Snowden have said. This team has done a remarkable job. Herculean task, short time frame, but to get to vet it with the folks on all 4 campuses and get a consensus on changes to this many of our collected rules is just remarkable. So you really are to be commended. I also would like to say that, agreeing with what you've said, Emily, we shouldn't get the feeling that this is a completed task. This is an area of the law and the whole and policy that is ever changing. And we have a new administration in Washington that I understand has some concern about the way these issues have been handled in the past. So we may see some policy direction going in different ways in the very near future, and that may well prompt the need to make more modifications in the way we are doing things. So I would urge you to be ready to see this same process utilized again in the next year or two as we try to maintain our compliance with the law and protect our students, faculty, and staff from the issues that are covered in this area. So
Senator
thank
Snowden,
you,
would
guys.
you want to make a motion now?
I'll let you make well, you make the motion. I'll second
All
it.
right. I would move that we adopt the amendments, collected rules and regulations as related to diversity, equity, and inclusion as summarized by topic in the public agenda that's been distributed.
I'd second that motion.
There's been a motion made and seconded that the proposed collected rules and regulations amendments as submitted, which would be 180.020 through 600.080, be adopted and approved by the board. Is any additional discussion, questions? If not, we'll call for a vote.
Curator Cups?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes?
Curator Steelman?
Yes.
You have all votes in favor.
Motion carried. Next item on the agenda is to move to, again, a committee as a whole to consider academic and student and external affairs. Curator Snowden?
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that you give a information report on the board's engagement with student leaders.
Yes, it has been the practice of the board for some time now at each of our curator meetings to meet with student leaders. In fact, we just had that luncheon with student leaders on the Columbia campus an hour or so ago, and I can tell you that the beneficiaries of those encounters are the board. We learned so much, and the one thing that we learn is that we have bright students, we have committed students, and we have students who are not at all bashful about sharing their thoughts and ideas. But I'm not going to go into great detail, but the comments that we receive range from concern about wait list for certain classes they'd like to take, or maybe even classes that are important to their major that are so filled so quickly that they have difficulty working that in to their schedule and trying to find ways to break through that log jam. The thought that diversity, equity, and inclusion education is helpful and appreciated by the students. And we even had those comments today from students we had lunch with. We had a lot of positive comments that the opportunity here on our 4 campuses allows students to grow as a person and to achieve or prepare to achieve the success. So I think I speak for the entire board when I say that we never leave one of these meetings with students that we don't feel good about our responsibility as curators. We have some fine students on all of our campus, some dedicated students, and students who are certainly the future of our nation. One thing in particular, in our last 2 luncheon meetings with students that was evident is that we have a lot of veterans, both Iraqi and Afghanistan veterans who are non-traditional students by age, who are back either resuming or starting their higher education. And they deal with challenges that are different than a lot of other students. And it's interesting how some of those organizations that they've formed to help one another have been so meaningful in allowing those veterans to deal with those issues that they deal with that are so different. So anyway, it's a great experience. It is a practice that we will continue and I think is beneficial.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We now have an action item you'd like to present?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, deals with a Bachelor of Science in Public Health at University of Missouri, Kansas City, and I guess we've got, that's not Bob Schwartz, is it? That's Steve Graham. Professor Graham or Dr. Graham.
Either will do. And I apologize in advance for a cold that I've been fighting. We have in front of you today for approval a proposal in a Bachelor of Science in Public Health from the University of Missouri, Kansas City. This is a program that fits in well with their mission and excuse me, a number of the programs that they have in the health-related fields. They have a Bachelor of Health Sciences, which has been very successful. That was approved a couple of years ago. That has, I think, as many as 600 majors, so it's a nice follow-through on that. It's a program that I think that they plan to use very efficient resources with. Most of the work that the students would take for the major, some 60 hours, 48 hours of those exist with current courses that are part of the nursing and curriculum in health sciences, so it's very efficient. They've tested out the veracity of this program by having a minor in public health in their health sciences program, and it's risen to 36 students now that are enrolled in the minor program, so it's very flexible. I've spoken with the Dean of Nursing even as recently as this morning, and they have a number of different features with this that allow students both in the major in public health to get a minor in criminology or in urban planning or something, so it increased the flexibility of it, but also for students that are in those fields to pick up a minor in public health. So it works in both directions. So once again, these health science programs are very vibrant and have a lot of career application in the field. They expect this to be very popular and done with a limited number of resources. They plan to add faculty only as they gain students, and so they've been through the financials very carefully with their chief fiscal officer. So I'm very supportive of this program. I think it's very creative and a really good use of resources. I would add, too, that you may recall that just a few months ago, we brought a Bachelor's of Public Health program in front of you from Mizzou. And they've worked very closely with Mizzou, with their partners, with Chris Hagelin, the Dean of Health Professions here, not only sort of crafting the program, but looking at ways that they can do things different together. They also have a joint public health master's program, so these programs can be feeders to that. And so in addition to connecting and working together, I see Chris is nodding in the back there. They also plan to serve as a feeder for both these programs. Chris has written a nice letter of support, so these are two colleges working very closely together. Have very different audiences, though, because there's an urban mission for the focus of the public health here, as opposed to a more rural area here in Columbia. So Without any further comments, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. This is a program that we recommend without reservation.
Doctor, I might add, it looks like there's a lot of openings in the healthcare field, and so we're really replenishing the people that are going to work primarily in that metropolitan area, but could be other places as well.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I'm glad you pointed that out, because there's a long list on the proposal of letters of support from public health agencies in the area. I think what we're finding, and I'll ask the two deans to keep me honest here, but a lot of the different careers and pathways now, because health is so encompassing, as you heard conversations about it during the human resources thing, that in the past we've just used people that came out with degrees in business or other kinds of things, but now there's a much more intelligent focus on that. In addition, the public health people can get out ahead of some of the diseases and concerns we have. And so you're right, it's a very excellent area. And for students that may have sought entrance into one of our professional programs in dentistry, medicine, pharmacy, something like that, are very good students but didn't get in, these are good alternative programs for them and good in retention. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that the Bachelor of Health Science program at Mizzou started out with estimates of maybe 400 or 500 majors, and they just hit 1,500 and are now the biggest major on the Columbia campus. So this is where Chris nods, okay? So we're all good. All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Dr. Graham?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I would move that the University of Missouri Kansas City be authorized to submit the attached proposal for a Bachelor of Science in Public Health to the Coordinating Board of Higher Education for approval.
Second.
Any discussion or questions? If not, we'll call the roll on the motion.
Curator Cups?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes?
Curator Stillman?
Yes.
Okay. All votes in favor.
Motion carried. Steve, thank you. Next item on the agenda is the Audit Committee report and recommendation for passage. And I would ask Michelle and Ryan, are they here? There's Michelle. Michelle Perano, this is your first time to get to appear before us, I think, in this capacity, and we welcome you and we thank you.
Thank you.
Michelle is the interim chief audit executive, succeeded Ryan Rapp in that capacity, and she is going to present the internal audit and consulting quarterly report. She'll be able to answer any questions after the report.
Thank you. So I will be providing an update of the audit activities since the October 2016 Board of Curators meeting. And in summary, we've completed 4 internal audits. We are finalizing 5 internal audit reports and 1 consulting project. We are in the process of completing field work for 6 internal audits and 1 consulting project. And we are in the planning phase with management to finalize the objectives and scope for 8 additional audits and 2 consulting projects. How does this? So the 4 audits, the completed audits that I will be presenting today are the School of Education for UMKC, the IT Consolidation Post-Implementation Audit for MU, the Intercollegiate Athletics Audit at MU, and the Veterinary Medicine at MU. So the School of Education Audit at UMKC. This is a school that generated revenues of $10 million in fiscal year 2016, and it consists of 3 divisions: counseling and education psychology, teacher education and curricular studies, educational leadership and policy foundation. Also, as part of the School of Education is the Berkeley Child and Family Development Center and the Continuing Professional and Education Program. So a little over 60% of the students are graduate students, and the school has experienced a 45% decrease in enrollment from fall of 2011 compared to fall of 2016, which this decline in enrollment is very consistent with schools of education found in urban settings across the country. So the purposes of the audit was to review financial processes at the School of Education level and also within the Division of Teacher Education and Curricular Studies, and to look at revenue and cash receipts at the School of Education level and for the Division of Counseling and Education Psychology. To look at an assessment of the operating processes within the continuing education program, and to understand and assess the productivity measures and metrics that are used by the academic departments within the School of Education. And this resulted in the identification of two issues. The opportunity to really, within the School of Education, use additional productivity measures. Currently, the enrollment data for the programs in each division, which includes head count of the students in the fall of each academic year, are used. And the recommendation was to add some additional metrics, such as the full-time equivalent costs and the revenue generated from the programs, in evaluating effectiveness and productivity of each program that is offered in the School of Education. Management agrees with this, and they are integrating this into their current university-wide efforts focusing on academic efficiency and their productivity portfolio reviews. The Community and Counseling Assessment Services Clinic, which is part of the Division of the Counseling and Educational Psychology, a minor issue with financial processes of restrictively endorsing checks was identified, which management has already taken care of that issue. So we feel this is just a risk ranking of 2, since all the issues identified are relatively minor in terms of impact to the campus or the School of Education. Our second audit is the IT consolidation post-implementation here at the Columbia campus. And in 2014, an effort was initiated to centralize the information technology support staff within various MU departments, colleges, and schools into one unit. This new unit is within the Department of IT and was created with a director and 6 IT teams to support the work centrally. They had been the responsibilities of these various departments and other units. So as the centralization occurred, a memorandum of understanding was executed to document the respective obligations of the new unit moving forward back to the unit, to the departments and schools that had these services. So this audit was a review and analysis of the individual and collective responsibilities as described in this memorandum of understanding, and an assessment of how each aligns with the goals of the project. Though the IT consolidation is still an active project, no issues were identified and no management action plans are required. The Division of IT continues to be receptive to consolidating centrally any IT support staff at the request of those units. And they continue to move forward with this, and they're doing a good job. So the risk ranking for this was a 1. The third is the intercollegiate athletics for the MU campus. And the primary goal of MU intercollegiate athletics is to develop the student athlete and prepare him or her as champions for life in the areas of academic integrity, social responsibility, and competitive athletic excellence. So this is what it means to be Mizzou made. And currently, there are 20 different men and women's sports teams competing at the NCAA Division I level as part of the SEC. And for the fiscal year 2016, intercollegiate athletics collected revenue in excess of $97 million. So the purpose of this audit was an assessment of processes and controls related to donor relations and gift endowment establishment, expenditures, and reporting. A look at the effectiveness of the oversight that was put in place related to the 2011 and 2014 men's basketball program, NCAA bylaw violations. Specifically, what we looked at was monitoring of the student athletes' employment arrangements and effectiveness of actions that were taken related to a November 2013 ticket sales review conducted by the MU Accounting Office. So the issues, even though there were a significant number of areas that we identified issues with, these were related to financial controls and processes. These were minor and are issues that can be easily handled. And for the NCAA, looking at the NCAA bylaw violations related to the men's basketball team, we looked at those policies and procedures and the practices they have in place, and the recommendation is to update the policies and procedures with the current practices. Management has agreed to these findings, and they are working to improve the fiscal oversight, particularly in the ticket and development offices, and update those policies and procedures. This audit was given a risk ranking of 3 due to the amount of the cash and the credit transactions that flow through the athletic department and the need to just improve this fiscal oversight. The fourth and final audit is veterinary medicine for the MU campus. And the College of Veterinary Medicine has an annual budget of approximately $65 million, including over $10 million in expenditures funded by research grants, which 70% of those dollars are federal dollars. There are 5 departments within the veterinary medicine, including biomedical science, pathobiology, medicine and surgery, diagnostic laboratory, and the laboratory for infectious diseases. In addition to its ongoing instruction and its research activities, this school generates approximately $15 million through operations of its veterinary health center, which resides within the Department of Medicine and Surgery and has 2 locations located in Columbia and Wentzville. This audit was performed at the request of the dean, and the purpose was to assess the effectiveness of financial processes related to budget development, execution, monitoring, the oversight and monitoring of the fiscal activity, procurement, travel authorizations and expenditures, the cash receipts, revenue cash receipts and transfers, endowment and gift funds, and asset management. So the issues identified here included, again, the opportunity to improve some fiscal management and oversight in the areas of travel reimbursement and purchasing cards, payroll reconciliation and review by management, some improvement of documenting gift accounting and monitoring the gift accounting, and also the opportunity to improve communication throughout the school about the fiscal and HR policies and procedure changes so people are aware of them. We also identified 2 related organizations operating within the College of Veterinary Medicine that do not have formal agreements indicating the responsibility of both of these parties. One is a bookstore, a not-for-profit bookstore, which was started back in the 80s, affiliated, so it's a 501c3, and it's using university resources, staff, space, and some funding. And there's no current formal agreement in place or oversight of how the funding is being utilized by the organization. So that is currently being reviewed to see how this fits with the mission. Do they currently still need it? It was put in place as a opportunity to support the educational needs of the students. And also a private cafe that's located in one of the facilities that's operating without a formal agreement, and management is in the process of getting that agreement in place as well. So all management has agreed to action plans for this audit, and it's been given a risk rating of 3 related to the need to improve fiscal oversight and the controls over some of the fiscal processes. So that concludes the presentations of the audits that we have completed since the October board meeting. And are there any questions?
Any questions at all regarding those specific internal audits? If not, thank you, Michelle. We'll move now to a next reporting item for you, and that is the Ethics and Compliance Hotline Annual Report. And if you will, explain just a little bit about what that is, and then go into your report on that hotline report.
We have at the system level an ethics and compliance hotline, and it is overseen by a committee comprising internal audit, human resources, and the Office of Legal Counsel. And so every campus, we have one number, and people can report issues from any campus, and we will then put it into our process for investigation and resolution. So what I'm going to present to you is the calendar year 2016 kind of summary of the types of calls we got and the dispositions of those calls. And it's important to note that according to the 2016 report to the nations on occupational fraud and abuse from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, tips provided by individuals within organizations regarding alleged fraud continues to be the most common detection method of occupational fraud. And in this report, 39% of fraud was reported through these tips. And for organizations with hotlines, the percentage of detecting fraud through tips increased to 47%. So this is an effective way to allow employees to raise concerns that they believe might potential concerns. So for the calendar year 2016, we had a total of 123 calls in that time period, 53% related to MU Health, and 37% related to higher education, with 2/3 of the higher education calls coming from the MU campus. The UM system and the University of Missouri St. Louis did not receive any calls in calendar year 2016. The 11 calls you see here that are related to information referrals. This is a category that are questions that are received related to the hotline, purpose and program, and we have a third-party vendor that manages this hotline for us. They respond and handle those calls. They answer the questions about how the hotline works and what the process and the purpose is. So that's just to note 11 of those calls came in, but we didn't have to do anything with those. So of the 123 calls received, the final disposition for investigation was that appropriate action was taken for 20. No action was necessary for 32 cases. There was insufficient information to investigate for 14 cases, and we do put out a request to the caller to provide us some more detailed information, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And we referred 28 calls to Human Resources or Title IX Office of Civil Rights. And it's important to note that we made a change in our process this year to leverage and take advantage of those investigative processes in Title IX and the HR offices. So we refer the calls to them, and they do the investigations, and they take care, and we put that information out on the hotline for the reporter as who to call to determine, to find out the final disposition. But human resource issues continue to lead all others, comprising 46% of the total calls, and this is very consistent nationally across all industries. And it's also very consistent that healthcare gets a lot of calls across all industries. We also pulled some national indicators to look at the number of incidents reported, the incident report rate per 100 employees. Nationally, it's 1.3. And for our total as a system, we are at 0.5, which indicates we have an opportunity to continue to raise awareness of this line and to let people know they have this option. That we calculated that statistic also for the healthcare side, and they are at 1.2 incidents reported rate per 100 employees. So that gives you a feel for how are we doing compared to what goes on across the country. The healthcare system is pretty consistent with where the calls are. We're a little below on the higher ed side. And we also looked at anonymous reports. It's interesting, nationally, that's dropping below 60%. A little over 40% of people are feeling more comfortable and they're identifying themselves on the call. We're at 63%. 63% of our calls were anonymous. So that gives you a sense of the national and where we compared. And are there any questions about the hotline or anything that came through this?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to know, what is the hotline number?
Oh.
That's all right. If you don't know, I assume it's.
Starts with 866, I know.
It's disseminated throughout the system then.
Yes, it's on, I know the healthcare system puts it on their website. We have posters. We're getting posters reprinted so that we can redistribute and, again, start an effort to get these out, especially on the campus side, to get them out into the departments. The healthcare side does a really good job of keeping the awareness up, and that's because it's been quite a while. It's just been mandatory that healthcare systems need to have a hotline and this reporting mechanism and promote it through their compliance program. So they're doing a good job of that.
Let me ask this question. Out of 123 calls last year, St. Louis had 0.
That's correct.
Wonder what the odds of that are with 4 campuses. I realize that the med school and the hospital is getting the most calls. That's about half of them. But out of the other half, not a single call or complaint from St. Louis. Is their line broken, or what's the deal?
No, it's the same. It's the same line, and it's answered by Navix, the third party. It's an opportunity for us to build awareness and to make a concerted push to get the posters out and get things out on the web so students and faculty and staff can see the number, because we should be getting calls from everywhere. Not because there's issues, but a lot of times we get calls of, I just don't know if this is an issue, but.
So has anybody asked the question I just asked about why we haven't gotten any calls from St. Louis?
We have asked that question and discussed it in our hotline committee, yes.
So it's been discussed, et
Yes.
cetera.
Well, we didn't get any calls from the system office either.
As a matter of procedure, we have one more action item that we need to take care of before we adjourn for a break here. So I'd like, Michelle, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I pursue a couple things with her, or are you running short on time?
We need to adjourn to go to this other meeting
Okay, I'll do it
right
privately.
now. Maybe.
I'll do it privately.
Okay. I'd like to call Ryan Rapp for an action item, and that is to approve the audit agreement with the BKD LLP.
Thank you, Chairman Graham. As you recall, last year, we put out an RFP for our external audit services, and through that process, the board selected BKD for a 5-year engagement. However, we're required to bring this back to the board for approval annually of the contract. So we're requesting approval to extend the contract to BKD. As you've noted in the mailing materials, it's still a 27% decrease in our fees and is a 2.1% increase over the fee from the prior year, which is what we agreed to them as part of the RFP process. I'd welcome any questions the board might have.
Any questions of Ryan, or do we have a motion to approve the proposed agreement with BKD LLP?
So moved.
We have a motion, we have a second. Any discussion or questions? Cindy, can we call for a vote?
Curator Cups?
Yes.
Curator Graham?
Yes.
Curator Henriksen?
Yes.
Curator Phillips?
Yes.
Curator Snowden?
Yes?
Curator Steelman?
Yes.
All votes in favor.
Motion carried. We are going to recess briefly for another function on campus at which the curators need to be in attendance, and then we will resume probably in another 20 minutes. However, at the time we come back here, we'll go into executive session, and we'll be in executive session for the remainder of the day. So, thank you. We're in recess.